I found out the truth on the same morning I walked into their kitchen expecting nothing more than a quiet conversation, and instead felt the floor buckle under me when the woman casually mentioned that the money meant for my wedding had already been given to the sibling. I stood there frozen while she stirred her coffee as if she had not just carved something open inside me. She said it made more sense to help someone who actually needs it. You can manage somehow, and the calm in her voice made the words slice deeper. The man glanced up from his newspaper and added, "You should be grateful. Your sibling has more potential anyway. You will be fine with something modest." My chest tightened so sharply I felt dizzy. I had spent months believing they were supporting me, months imagining a ceremony. I had scraped every corner of my life to plan. And suddenly it all collapsed in a single breath. I looked around the room and everything felt wrong. The polished counters, the fresh flowers, the warm smell of buttery pastries filling the air, all of it glowing with the comfort they claimed they could not afford for me. While my mind spun, the woman kept talking, saying, "It is family we help where help matters most. You should not make this dramatic." The man nodded as if they were discussing a grocery list, not the betrayal. Twisting inside my ribs, I heard myself ask quietly, "You promised. You said the money was set aside for my wedding." The woman shrugged, a soft, careless movement that made my stomach lurch. "Well, things change. Besides, your sibling has real needs. This is life. You adjust." I felt my fingers go cold, my pulse pounding in my ears, the room tilting slightly as if someone had dimmed all the edges. I stared at their faces, so calm, so certain, while something inside me splintered. The man pushed a plate of pastries toward me with an impatient sigh. "You will figure something out. You always do. Stop looking at us like we hurt you. You are being sensitive." His words hit me harder than the betrayal itself. My grip tightened on the back of the chair, steadying myself as the scent of warm sugar suddenly turned nauseating. The woman added, "You can make your wedding simple. Nothing wrong with that. Do not start a scene." And then she said the sentence that burned itself into my memory, "You should be happy for your sibling. They deserve it more than you." That was the moment the warmth in the room curdled into something freezing. I felt my breath catch my throat tightening while a single thought rose inside me, sharp and clear. They never intended to keep their promise. They never intended to see me. I glanced at the envelope sitting on the counter, thick with brochures and plans for the wedding they had just destroyed, and something in me shifted firmly like a lock clicking into place. I whispered softly, "You are right. Things do change, but you will not like how this one ends." They both looked up, confused, annoyed, but the cut had already opened fully inside me, leaving no space for the person I used to be, only the cold, steady certainty of someone who had finally stopped begging to be valued. The days after that moment felt like walking through thick fog, each breath heavy, each step uncertain, as if the world had shifted in a way only I could feel. I moved quietly through my routines, replaying their words over and over until they echoed against the walls of my mind. "You should be happy for your sibling. They deserve it more than you." The sentence lodged inside me like a shard, refusing to dissolve. At first I felt the collapse fully, a deep sinking grief that pressed into my chest whenever I looked at the wedding plans. I had collected the small details. I had poured myself into everything, now meaningless in the shadow of their decision. I would sit alone with those scattered pieces, feeling the sharp ache of being dismissed so easily yet again. Their comfort more important than my milestones, their pride more urgent than my happiness. There were mornings when I woke with tears already burning behind my eyes, as if my body remembered before my mind caught up. But even inside that sadness, something else began to stir, something steady and familiar, like the quiet thrum of a heartbeat under a storm. I realized I had spent years adjusting, shrinking, apologizing, bending my life around their choices until I could no longer tell where my desires ended and theirs began. I told myself that this wound, their latest casual betrayal, was going to destroy me if I let it, so instead I started paying attention to the spark forming beneath the pain, the spark that whispered, "Not this time." I began making decisions slowly, deliberately choosing actions that made me feel in control for the first time in a long time. I returned deposits for things I no longer needed and redirected that money towards something they never expected, a backup plan that grew quietly in the corners of my mind. I took extra hours at work, stacking every bit of income like bricks, forming a foundation only I could stand on. I cut costs ruthlessly, saving with a discipline I had never believed myself capable of. I documented everything, every message, every promise they made, every detail of how the money had been redirected to the sibling without a second thought. It felt strange at first, collecting proof of their choices, but with each screenshot and each note I felt stronger, more grounded, less trapped by the confusion they always used to manipulate me. One night as I reviewed the growing folder, a calm realization washed over me. I was no longer trying to earn their approval. I was preparing for something far more important, my own liberation. The turning point came quietly when they called, acting as though nothing had happened, asking about wedding updates, asking when they could meet the coordinator, asking if I had adjusted to the new budget. The woman even said cheerfully, "You should thank us, it pushed you to be creative." I stared at my phone, hearing none of it, the calm inside me expanding like a tide. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, I didn't try to explain. Instead, I let my voice drop into a tone I barely recognized, steady, firm, final. I said, "You will see exactly how creative I can be." Then I ended the call without waiting for their reply, and for the first time in my life I felt the ground shift in my favor, a quiet awakening blooming inside my chest, telling me that everything ahead would be different, because this time I wasn't rebuilding for them, I was rebuilding for me. The shift came not with a scream but with a whisper carried through a cousin who didn't realize the information would hit me like a match dropped into dry leaves. She said casually that the man had been arguing with bankers about a loan. The woman had been cornered by relatives asking why their finances suddenly looked unstable, and the sibling, the one they had redirected my wedding fund toward, had been overheard saying, "I never asked them to do that. Why am I being blamed for it?" I listened quietly, letting each detail sink into me, not with satisfaction but with a strange focused calm, as if the world was rearranging itself around a truth I had always known but never said out loud. Their perfect image was cracking, and the timing couldn't have been sharper or more precise. They contacted me the next day, this time with urgency threaded into every word. The woman said, "We need to talk, come to the house," and the tone she used was the same tone she reserved for family emergencies, except this one was of their own making. I told her no. I told her if they wanted to speak they would come to me, and even in the silence that followed I felt something shift sharply, like a rope snapping. They arrived at my apartment 2 hours later, stepping inside with expressions that flickered between anger, desperation, and the faintest edge of fear. My place was modest, small, lived in, real, nothing like the glossy perfection they hid behind, and seeing them in my space felt surreal. The man tried speaking, first sitting stiffly on my couch, saying, "The situation is complicated, we need help covering the rest of the tuition. Your sibling can't afford to lose the program." I let him finish, then simply said, "You mean the program paid for with my wedding fund?" His mouth tightened as if the truth had a taste he couldn't swallow. The woman leaned forward, her voice shaking with a forced softness. "We love you. We only did what was best for the family. You shouldn't hold this over us." That sentence hit me hotter than their betrayal. "You did what was best for yourselves," I replied. They blinked as if no one had ever said it aloud. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out the Folder thick with everything I had collected: messages, receipts, bank transfers, their written promise about the wedding fund, their notes saying don't worry we have it saved, the woman's text reading you'll get the full amount no matter what. I laid each sheet on the table slowly, deliberately letting the weight of their own words corner them. The woman's breath hitched when she saw her own handwriting. The man frowned so deeply it carved lines across his face. He said, "This is private. Why are you keeping all this?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Because you taught me I had to." The silence that followed felt like the room folding in on itself. The air thickened, their faces paling as they realized I had every piece of the truth, and for the first time I saw fear beneath their entitlement, real fear, the kind that comes when people realize the person they underestimated is the only one holding the narrative together. The man tried regaining control, saying you wouldn't dare expose this, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I leaned back and answered calmly, "You'll find out exactly what I dare and write." Then something in the room shifted so sharply I felt it in my bones. The moment the power flipped, the moment they understood that whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. I let the silence stretch until it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen, and when I finally spoke, my voice carried a steadiness that made both of them flinch. I told them I knew exactly why they were here, that their sudden concern, their soft voices, their trembling attempts at kindness were nothing more than desperation wrapped in familiar tones. The man shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing as if he could shake off the truth, while the woman clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. She whispered, "What do you want from us?" And the question sounded almost fragile, almost frightened. I leaned forward, letting the folder of evidence rest between us like a growing shadow, and said, "I will help you cover the unpaid amount. The exact number you need to keep your crisis from getting worse, nothing more, but you will admit the truth clearly, without twisting it, without dressing it up, without blaming circumstances or destiny or me. You will say out loud that you took my wedding fund, that you redirected it to the sibling, that you lied to my face and told me the money was safe." The man recoiled as if I had slapped him. He sputtered, "That is not how families talk. You are being dramatic. We only did what was best for everyone." I cut him off with a calm, steady tone. "You did what was best for yourselves." The woman swallowed hard, her eyes shining with a thin film of dread. She said quietly, "You want us to humiliate ourselves. You want us to say these awful things where people can hear us." I answered, "You already said them. You just never expected to be held accountable." They exchanged a look, the same look they always used when deciding how to manipulate me, the look that once made me shrink but now felt small, powerless. Their tricks fell flat in the room where I held the ground. The man tried again, leaning forward with a rehearsed softness, saying, "If you help us we can keep this quiet. No need to drag everyone into private matters." I shook my head. "You think this is private? You made it public the moment you broke your promise, then acted like I should accept it, like a blessing." The woman's voice cracked as she whispered, "If we agree, what will you do with our words?" And I let the next line fall with deliberate clarity. "I will make them public so no one can rewrite what happened, so no one can twist the story again." They froze, truly froze, their breaths catching in their throats as though the oxygen in the room had thinned. The man's lips parted soundlessly. The woman trembled, her fingers twitching against her knees. Their world, that carefully polished, fragile world of image and pride and pretense, flickered like a candle on the edge of dying. She whispered, "Please do not do this." And I answered, "You should have thought about that before you made your choices." Their shoulders sagged as if something heavy had finally landed on them, and the woman's voice escaped in a thin, trembling thread, "We will do it." The man said nothing, but the silence around him was an admission in itself. I stood and watched them rise slowly, as though the weight of their own actions threatened to pull them back down, and as I walked them to the door I felt the subtle shift inside me the moment I understood that I was no longer reacting to their world, I was shaping mine, and for the first time they were the ones standing unsure of the ground beneath their feet. The room chosen for their confession filled long before they arrived, voices buzzing like a hive. Restless with anticipation, everyone sensing that something hidden and heavy was about to crack open. I stepped inside quietly, feeling the heat of bodies, the press of curious eyes, the electric tension vibrating through the air, and at the center of it all an empty space waiting for them. When the man entered first, his face looked drained, as if all the color had been washed out by fear. His collar slightly crooked, his hands trembling despite the forced smile he tried to anchor onto his lips. The woman followed with stiff, hesitant steps, her eyes darting around the room as though every familiar face had suddenly turned into a threat. She whispered, "Why are all these people here?" And someone near her muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Because you wanted to keep it private." Remember, the words hit her like a slap. A murmur rippled through the room and the man cleared his throat, attempting authority, but his voice came out thin. "Everyone, just settle down. We are here to clarify a misunderstanding." I stepped forward and said, "There is no misunderstanding, only the truth you owe." Then the room fell into a hush so sudden I could hear the faint hum of the lights above us. The woman looked at me, her eyes glassy, almost pleading as she whispered, "Must we do this here?" I replied, "You agreed." The man exhaled sharply, rubbed his forehead, then looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone who might rescue him from the moment, but no one moved. They had come for answers, for justice, for spectacle, for whatever made them feel better about the years they had watched this family shine while quietly stepping on everyone beneath them. The man finally spoke, his voice cracking. "We redirected the wedding money. There was need, there was pressure. We thought it was the right choice." A woman in the crowd snapped loudly, "You lied. You told everyone the money was protected." Then the siblings' friend stepped forward, saying they said the fund was theirs, that they deserved it more. A wave of gasps spread through the room and the woman collapsed onto a chair, clutching her face as the whispers sharpened into accusations. Someone shouted, "You stole from your own child." Another added, "You smiled at their excitement while taking everything from them." The man tried to defend himself, sputtering, "We meant no harm. Families help each other. We thought they would understand." But his voice kept breaking, collapsing under the weight of every pair of watching eyes. I stepped closer, letting the truth settle heavily. They did not just take the money, they promised it. They reassured me. They looked into my eyes and lied. A tremor ran through the crowd, a collective recoil. The man shook his head, muttering, "It was one mistake." But a neighbor shot back, "You made a choice, not a mistake." Another voice echoed, "You hurt them for your pride." The woman lowered her hands, revealing a face pale, shaken, utterly exposed. She whispered, I'm sorry." But the room did not soften. Her apology drowned beneath everything she had built and destroyed. The murmurs grew louder, the judgment sharper, and I watched the two of them fold in on themselves as their last layer of dignity peeled away. Their world did not just crack, it caved in right there in front of everyone. And as I stepped back, the noise faded behind me, replaced by a quiet that settled inside my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just a slow exhale, the feeling of a long locked door finally swinging open and letting me walk out into my own life for the first time. When the noise of their collapse faded into a distant hum, I found myself standing in a silence so wide it felt like a new landscape stretching out beneath my feet, a place with no demands, no accusations, no shrinking of myself to fit inside someone else's comfort. For the first time I felt the air move around me, gently, almost tender, as if asking what I wanted rather than telling me who I had to be. I woke the next morning with a steadiness that surprised me, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has ripped everything open and left only what truly matters. I sat with A cup of warm tea, feeling the heat sink into my palms, and I realized I was no longer bracing for their voices, no longer calculating how to protect myself from the next blow. There was only quiet, and in that quiet a question rose softly: what do I build now that the ruins behind me are no longer mine to hold? I started with something small, something that felt like giving back to the person I used to be. I created a fund for people who had been wounded by the ones who should have loved them, people who had been promised help only to have it stolen, people who had been silenced by words meant to keep them obedient. Each request I approved felt like stitching a little piece of the world back together, a quiet act of mending that helped me heal too. I also allowed myself to return to the dream I had buried beneath their expectations, a dream I once whispered to myself in the dark before their voices drowned it out. I walked into a small studio, the kind filled with scattered tools and soft light, and I felt a spark of recognition as my hands touched the materials I used to love. I worked slowly, clumsily at first, letting muscle memory guide me, learning to trust the movements again, and with every creation I felt something inside me settle more firmly, as if my life were taking shape in ways I had always hoped for but never believed possible. I built a circle of people around me too, not bound by blood but by choice, people who showed up with open hands and open hearts, people who listened without judging, people who laughed with me, shared meals with me, held space for me in ways I had never known before. They became a kind of family, one I did not have to earn, one that existed without taking from me. Forgiveness arrived differently than I expected, not as a sudden wave but as a soft loosening, a gentle release. I realized I did not want to carry anger, I did not want my future shaped by bitterness. I wanted peace, distance, clarity, so I chose a quiet kind of forgiveness, not an invitation back into my life, not a reopening of old doors, just a simple letting go, allowing the past to remain where it belonged, behind me, not ahead of me. The final shift came one morning as I stepped outside into pale warm light, feeling the breeze brush against my skin like a promise. I knew my scars would always remain, I knew the story would always be part of me, but it no longer hurt to remember it. The pain had faded, leaving only strength, the strength of someone who walked through fire and kept moving. I looked ahead at the open path before me and felt a slow, genuine smile rise from somewhere deep, knowing the life I would build next would be mine entirely, and no one would ever take that from me again.